In 1897, a rich kid from Pittsburgh whose family helped cause the worst man-made disaster in American history built a gasoline-powered tricycle in his workshop. That tricycle became America's first truck company, and that company refused to die for 128 years. Through 2 world wars, 3 corporate takeovers, 1 bankruptcy, and enough boardroom betrayals to fill a season of prestige television. The story of Autocar is not a conventional success story. It is something stranger and more stubborn than that. It is the story of a company that survived everything. Every force that kills American manufacturers, consolidation, globalization, mismanagement, cheap imports, Autocar absorbed them all and kept going. Not because the executives were brilliant, half the time the executives were the problem. It survived because the trucks themselves were so absurdly, relentlessly, almost insultingly tough that the people who use them, miners, loggers, refuse haulers, construction crews, the people who do the hardest physical work in the industrial economy, simply refused to let the brand disappear, even when the corporations that owned it actively tried to kill it. Louis Semple Clark was born in 1866 into the kind of Pittsburgh industrial money that did not just attend elite clubs, it built them. His family were members of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, an exclusive summer retreat in the mountains 16 miles above Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The membership list read like a census of Gilded Age power. Andrew Carnegie had a cottage there. Henry Clay Frick had a cottage there. Andrew Mellon's family was connected to the club. These were the men forging the American industrial empire out of Pittsburgh steel, railroad money, and banking capital. The club owned a dam, a big one, the largest earthen dam on the face of the earth at the time, holding back a 3-mile-long private lake called Lake Conemaugh for the recreational enjoyment of roughly 60 wealthy families. Local engineers and downstream residents had warned for years that the dam was deteriorating. The spillway had been lowered. Fish screens blocked debris flow. The club members did not want to spend the money on proper structural repairs. They were too busy fishing and socializing. In May of 1889, after several days of unusually heavy rain, that dam broke. The wall of water that poured through the valley below killed over 2,200 people in Johnstown. It was the deadliest man-made disaster in American history at that time. Louis Clark was 22 years old. He had been a formal member of the club for exactly 1 month, reportedly the last person to join before the disaster. He had built his own camera out of mechanical curiosity, and some of the photographs he took of the club grounds in the years before the collapse are now among the only visual records that exist of the place. Those photos surfaced in his granddaughter's attic in 1991, over a century later. They are now held by the Johnstown Area Heritage Association. That catastrophe might have defined another man. Clark channeled his restless mechanical energy somewhere else entirely. He was not a businessman in the traditional sense. He was a tinkerer, an inventor, a compulsive problem solver, the kind of person who builds a camera from scratch because buying one is not interesting enough. By the mid-1890s, the automobile was barely a concept in America, more sideshow attraction than transportation, and Clark was already deep into experiments with motorized vehicles. In 1897, he completed a 1-cylinder gasoline-powered tricycle he called Autocar No. 1. It ran. He recruited his brothers John and James, his father Charles, and a family friend named William Morgan. Together, they founded the Pittsburgh Motor Vehicle Company on October 21, 1897. The next year, they built a proper 4-wheeled car called the Pittsburgher. That car now sits in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn. In 1899, they moved the entire operation east across Pennsylvania to Ardmore, outside Philadelphia, renamed the company Autocar, and did something unprecedented. They built and sold the first motor truck ever commercially available in the United States. That first truck was a delivery wagon with a payload capacity of 700 pounds, a choice of a 5 or 8 horsepower motor, and the engine mounted under the driver's seat. The marketing pitch was that any driver could operate it with more safety than he could drive a horse. The whole point of the layout was efficiency. With the engine underneath instead of in front, the driver's compartment took up only 29% of the vehicle's total length instead of 41%. More room for cargo, less wasted space. Autocar's own catalog showed comparative diagrams proving the advantage. A conventional front-engine layout wasted 41% of the vehicle length on the engine bay and driver's compartment, leaving a 50% overhang of load past the rear axle. The Autocar layout eliminated the overhang problem and put more weight over the drive axle. Better traction, better handling, better use of every square inch. That cab-over-engine concept is still the fundamental architecture of the severe-duty trucks Autocar builds today. Same idea, same company, same name. 127 years later. We dig into stories like this every week. Trucks, engines, engineering disasters, military tech, the machines that built and defended the modern world. If you are not subscribed yet, this would be a good time. Now, back to Clark. The man was not just building vehicles. He was inventing fundamental components that every modern automobile still uses, and doing it before most people had even seen a car. Clark developed the first porcelain-insulated spark plug for gasoline engines in 1896. Prior to his design, spark plugs failed constantly because they could not handle the heat and electrical stress of combustion. Clark's porcelain insulation solved the problem. He later sold the patent to Champion. Every spark plug manufactured since then, billions of them across a century and a quarter, uses his basic design. He perfected the drive shaft system for automobiles, replacing the fragile chain drive mechanisms that everyone else relied on. Chains stretched, chains broke, chains required constant adjustment. A drive shaft was simpler, stronger, and more reliable. In 1901, Autocar built the first car in North America to use shaft drive. In November of that year, Clark drove it from the factory in Ardmore to the New York Automobile Show at Madison Square Garden in 6 hours and 15 minutes, a publicity stunt that also served as a durability test. That vehicle is now in the Smithsonian, alongside Autocar No. 1. Clark also created the first practical circulating oil system for engine lubrication, which meant engines could run longer without seizing, and developed the double reduction rear axle, which allowed trucks to carry heavier loads at lower engine speeds. And here is the detail that shaped every car you have ever driven. Clark insisted on putting the steering wheel on the left side of the vehicle. Before him, center drive and right-hand drive were common in American cars. The first 800 Autocars used steering levers before Clark switched to a left-mounted wheel. His decision eventually became the standard across the entire American automotive industry. One stubborn engineer in a factory outside Philadelphia determined which side of the road 330 million Americans would drive on. Clark served as chief engineer and vice president of Autocar until he sold his interest in the company and retired in 1929. By 1907, more than 1,000 employees worked at Autocar. But Clark understood something his competitors did not. The passenger car market was about to become a bloodbath. Henry Ford was preparing the Model T. Mass production would crush small manufacturers who could not compete on price. So in 1911, Autocar stopped making cars entirely, walked away from the consumer market, went all in on commercial trucks designed for specific industrial applications. Within a decade, the company offered 3 different truck models with capacities from 1.5 to 6 tons, various wheelbases, both conventional and engine under-the-seat configurations. Every truck was custom engineered to order. Through the 20s and 30s, Autocar burrowed deeper into severe-duty markets nobody else wanted. The Blue Streak 6-cylinder engine, enclosed cabs, four-wheel drive systems, proprietary axles, 12-speed transmissions. The Model U, with its engine-under-the-seat design, was chosen by Washington, D.C. for municipal refuse collection. Retailers like Wanamaker's relied on Autocar for daily deliveries. Sunoco trusted them to carry fuel. Autocar was not building pretty trucks for showrooms. It was building machines for jobs that shredded other equipment inside a year. Mining, logging, oil fields, road construction. And every truck was built to the customer's exact specifications. The Depression hit hard. Sales fell from 3,300 units in 1929 to 1,000 in 32 and kept sliding. Clark himself had already sold his interest and retired to Palm Beach. The company weathered the downturn by doubling down on what it did best, building trucks for customers who needed equipment that worked no matter what the economy was doing. Mines still operated during the Depression, refuse still had to be collected, roads still needed to be built. Autocar's customer base was not discretionary. These were essential industries that could not stop working just because Wall Street had collapsed. By 35, sales had crawled back to just over 1,000 units. By 38, they had reached 1,600. By 39, just over 2,000. Slow recovery, but recovery. And in 1939, Autocar became an early adopter of diesel power, offering the 672 cubic inch, 150 horsepower Cummins HB 600 engine. Diesel trucks burned cheaper fuel and hauled heavier loads than their gasoline counterparts. For operators running tight margins in a tight economy, the cost savings were not trivial. They were survival. Clark died in January of 1957 at 90 years old in Palm Beach, Florida. He is buried in Allegheny Cemetery in Pittsburgh. By then, his tricycle was already in the Smithsonian, and his company had gone to war twice. Before World War II, Autocar had built roughly 70,000 trucks in its entire history. During the war, the company produced over 37,000 military vehicles in just a few years. They nearly matched their entire lifetime output in a single conflict. The main product was the M3 half-track, the hybrid wheeled and tracked personnel carrier that became one of the defining vehicles of the Allied war effort. The design used standard commercial components wherever possible to accelerate production and simplify field repair. The front axle used conventional wheels for steering. The rear section ran on vertical volute spring tracks for traction. Autocar was one of 4 manufacturers. They built over 12,000 units. White produced about 15,000. Diamond T built 12,000 more. Total M3 production across all factories reached roughly 41,000 vehicles. The half-track was not sophisticated. It had 6 to 12 millimeters of side armor. No roof. Soldiers riding in the back were fully exposed to shrapnel and mortar fragments from above. It was powered by a White 160AX inline 6-cylinder gasoline engine, making 148 horsepower. With 60 gallons of fuel, it covered about 220 miles. Gross weight was roughly 17,600 pounds. Top speed 45 miles per hour on good road. But the M3 went everywhere. It hauled infantry into combat across North Africa, towed howitzers into firing position in Italy, carried ammunition through the hedgerows of Normandy, evacuated wounded on every front, and served as mobile command posts across the Pacific. The M16 variant mounted .450 caliber Brownings on a Maxim quad turret and became one of the war's most devastating anti-aircraft platforms. 5,000 half-tracks went to the Soviet Red Army under Lend-Lease, and the first Allied vehicle to enter Paris during the August 1944 liberation was an M3 named Espanacani, crewed by Spanish Republican soldiers fighting under the French tricolor. An American-built vehicle, manufactured partly by Autocar in Pennsylvania, driven by Spanish exiles, flying French colors, liberating the French capital from German occupation, War is complicated logistics. When the fighting ended, General Eisenhower wrote Autocar directly. It was the job of motor transport to deliver the goods, and American wheels and axles never let us down. That was not a politician's thank you note. That was a battlefield endorsement from the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe. Eisenhower knew what trucks meant to the war effort better than almost anyone. Back in 1919, as a young lieutenant colonel, he had participated in the Army's first transcontinental motor convoy, driving military trucks from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. That experience, 62 days to cover 3,251 miles on roads that were often barely roads at all, had shown him firsthand how important reliable motor transport was. It also planted the seed for what eventually became the interstate highway system during his presidency. When Eisenhower praised Autocar's contribution to the war effort, he was speaking from 3 decades of direct personal experience with military logistics. Autocar poured that wartime reputation straight back into civilian production. The company had proven it could mass produce under extreme pressure. Now it went back to doing what it had always done best, building one truck at a time, engineered for one customer's specific needs. In 1950, they introduced the all-steel driver cab, replacing decades-old wood and metal construction. The new cab was built from stamped steel panels welded into a rigid monocoque shell. No wood framing, no composite panels, just steel. The cab became the defining visual signature of Autocar trucks for 37 consecutive years. It was not aerodynamic. It was not pretty. It was not designed to win awards. It was designed to keep an operator alive in a rock quarry where chunks of limestone came off the blast face with no warning. And it did that job without complaint. By the early 50s, Autocar had over 100 company-owned dealers. Then, in 1953, White Motor Corporation acquired the company and moved production to a new plant in Exton, Pennsylvania. White made Autocar its premium severe-duty brand and opened access to White's Mustang engine alongside Cummins and Detroit diesel options. Then came 1957, the year Autocar stopped building trucks and started building monsters. The AP series targeted extreme off-highway applications. The AP40 had a 40-ton payload capacity and was the largest single-engine vehicle in the world at the time of its debut. Over 13 feet tall, nearly 32 feet long, powered by a 12-cylinder V-type turbocharged Cummins diesel delivering 600 horsepower. An engine previously reserved for locomotives. The frame was all welded box construction from 1-inch carbon steel plate. In 1964, the AP-19 pushed further. 24 tons empty, 900,000-pound gross combination weight, 401 tons of rated towing capacity, a tubular front axle rated at 30,000 pounds, planetary rear axles at 200,000 pounds each, a Cummins 512 making 525 horsepower, later replaced by a 750-horse Cummins KT inline 6. Top speed of 35 miles per hour. This was not a truck. It was an industrial anchor on wheels. The CK64 half cabs followed, purpose-built for carrying concrete mixers, stone blocks, and 35-foot booms. The Autocar brochure from this era stated it plainly. Everything about the Autocar is tough, and everything about the Autocar is geared to unusually harsh, even hazardous conditions, not advertising. A statement of design philosophy. The engineering behind these machines was genuinely innovative, not just brute force. Standard heavy-duty truck frames used quarter-inch steel with spot welds. Autocar used 1-inch plate with continuous welding. 4 times the material, distributed stress across the entire structure. In quarry and mining work, frame fatigue from spot weld stress concentration is the primary cause of catastrophic failure. Autocar engineered that failure mode out of existence. Competitor frames cracked in 2 years of quarry service. Autocar frames ran for a decade. The planetary rear axles used internal gear reduction to multiply torque at the wheel hub. A 500 horsepower engine could deliver wheel forces equivalent to over 1,000 horsepower through conventional geometry. Instead of building a bigger engine, Autocar built smarter axles. Cooling systems were oversized for worst-case sustained operation, low speed, full load, extreme heat, all day. Other trucks boiled over after 3 hours. Autocar trucks ran through the night. None of this protected Autocar from corporate collapse. White Motor Corporation had been on a downward trajectory since the mid-60s. The company had increased sales from $130 million in 1950 to $770 million by '67. But the growth was fueled by acquisitions that loaded the balance sheet with debt. The purchase of Euclid in '68, an attempt to break into the off-road hauler market, was particularly damaging. White paid top dollar for a business that never generated the returns the board projected. Sales declined through the '70s. The oil crises of '73 and '79 hammered demand for heavy trucks as diesel prices spiked, and the broader economy contracted. Foreign manufacturers from Japan and Europe began offering more fuel-efficient models and taking market share. A proposed merger with White Consolidated Industries, which might have provided a financial lifeline, was initially blocked by the federal government and then approved too late to matter. They brought in Simon Bunky Knudsen, the former president of Ford Motor Company, to restructure. Knudsen was a legendary auto executive. He showed a $20 million profit in '73. But the underlying rot was too deep. He sold off a third of the company's assets, including the profitable Euclid Hauler division, moved the corporate headquarters from downtown Cleveland's Erie View Plaza to cheaper space in Eastlake, cut employees across every division, moved truck production out of the historic East 79th Street plant in Cleveland to a newer facility in Virginia to reduce labor costs. None of it worked. In September of 1980, White Motor Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, case number 8013361, in the Northern District of Ohio. Between that filing and December of '81, the company hemorrhaged $311 million. The White Motor Corporation, one of the original giants of American trucking, a company that had been building vehicles since 1900, ceased to exist by 1985. Autocar's production had already been relocated from Exton, Pennsylvania, to White's plant in Ogden, Utah, just before the collapse. In August of 1981, Sweden's AB Volvo bought all of White's truck-producing plants except the aging Cleveland facility. Autocar became part of the new Volvo White Truck Corporation. The Swedes launched the Autocar DK Severe Duty line in '83 as a replacement for the DC series. The DK was used in heavy dump truck, concrete mixer, refuse, and oil field applications. They also launched the AT64F, a long-haul tractor marketed as the Legend. Then in '86, Volvo White absorbed General Motors' heavy truck business, creating Volvo GM Heavy Truck Corporation. More brands, more consolidation, less room for a niche specialist. On December 18, 1987, the last Autocar truck built with the legendary custom driver cab rolled off the line in Ogden. That cab had defined the brand since 1950, 37 years of identity. Gone. The DK was replaced in '88 by the ACL and ACM models, which used the White Expeditor cab shared across the entire corporate family. The new trucks wore the iconic Autocar bow tie on the hood sides, but a white GMC logo sat on the grille. For Autocar loyalists, the people who had bought Autocar trucks, specifically because they were built different from everything else on the market, it was watching a living thing get hollowed out from the inside. For nearly 2 decades, Autocar existed inside Volvo as a diminishing product line. The branding shuffled constantly. In '96, trucks carried a Volvo Autocar badge, The bow tie logo moved from the hood to the grille and back again. The company had been reduced to what was essentially a badge engineering exercise. By 2000, Volvo had wrung whatever residual value it could from the name. In October of that year, the last Autocar was assembled, 103 years after Clark built his tricycle in Pittsburgh. The oldest motor vehicle brand in the Western Hemisphere was officially discontinued. No ceremony, no press conference, just a last truck rolling off a line that would now build something with a different name on it. Then antitrust stepped in. Volvo's acquisition of Renault Trucks in 2000 brought Mack Trucks into the fold. The combined entity now held an anti-competitive share of the refuse truck market in North America. Federal regulators forced a divestiture. Volvo agreed to sell the Speditor low-cab forward designs, related intellectual property, and the Autocar brand to GVW Group, a private holding company based in Highland Park, Illinois, led by Chairman Andrew Tates. GVW was not a typical private equity firm looking to strip assets. Tates had already proven he could resurrect dormant vehicle brands. In 1998, GVW had acquired the P-chassis assets from General Motors and launched Workhorse Custom Chassis, building a new 200,000-square-foot manufacturing facility and hiring 300 people in under a year. He saw the same potential in Autocar, a brand with a century of severe-duty credibility, a loyal customer base, and a product gap in the market that no one else was filling. In 2001, GVW formed Autocar LLC. Jimmy Johnston, a truck and body industry veteran who had been in the business since 1986 and had focused on the refuse industry since '92, became president in 2003. He has led the company ever since. The mandate was the oldest mandate in the company's history. Purpose-built trucks, custom engineered for each customer's specific application, severe duty only, no compromise, no half measures, no trying to be everything to everyone. The results have been quietly remarkable. Today, Autocar operates from its headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama, where it moved in 2017 and opened a 1.2 million square foot manufacturing facility, and from a production plant in Hagerstown, Indiana. Over 400 employees, 4 truck models, the ACX cabover, the ACMD, the ACTT terminal tractor, and the DC64 conventional, relaunched in 2019, carrying the refreshed bow tie logo exactly 100 years after the emblem first appeared. Its frame rails use 160,000 psi yield strength steel, 24% stronger than the industry standard, 1,700 foot-pounds of torque capacity, 80,000 pound toe pins, 325 degrees of driver visibility through nearly 50 square feet of glass. Over 100 design improvements made from direct operator input. In 2021, the EACT became Autocar's first all-electric vehicle. In 2022, the all-electric EACX refuse truck followed. The company that invented the porcelain spark plug now builds trucks that do not need one. The Autocar story is about the difference between a brand that exists in corporate filings and a product that exists in the field. Brands can be acquired and shelved and forgotten by people who have never operated the equipment. Products either survive the work or they do not. For 128 years, across every ownership change, every corporate restructuring, every attempt to dilute or discontinue the name, Autocar trucks survived the work. And every time someone in a corner office decided the brand was expendable, someone in a quarry or on a refuse route or in a mine kept it alive. Because when your livelihood depends on a machine that absolutely cannot fail, you remember who built it, a company born from a gasoline tricycle and the shadow of the Johnstown Flood. That won a war endorsement from Eisenhower. That built the largest single-engine vehicle on Earth. That was absorbed by White, swallowed by Volvo, discontinued, and resurrected by a holding company that saw what the accountants missed. That is not a business case study. That is a survival story. And the truck at the center of it, 128 years old and counting, just keeps hauling. And there you have it. The longest-running truck brand in America, built by a company too stubborn to stay dead. If you have driven one, worked on one, or watched an Autocar pull a load that would snap a lesser truck clean in half, put that story in the comments. And if you made it this far, subscribe. We do this every week.